I'm Rod Giltaca. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. The Canadian government is banning guns. But did they base their decision on real evidence? Or is the truth a lot different than Canadians think? We're about to find out. Good evening, and welcome to Gun Ban Canada Exposed. In this series, we examine the arguments used by the Liberal Party government to justify their controversial Bill C-71 and the massive May 1st gun ban. Tonight, we examine the relentless claim that Canada desperately needs common-sense gun laws. The implication is that either Canada has no firearm regulation or we have weak regulations, and new laws are the answer to reducing firearm-related violence. Spreading the idea that Canada has insufficient control over firearms is a tactic that many people consider widely deceptive because it makes average Canadians think that this is the reason we have violence. To prove this particular point, let's have a look at a public opinion poll used by anti-gun groups to claim that Canadians are united behind more gun control. In April 2020, Angus Reid conducted an online survey that found that 65% of Canadians strongly support a ban on civilian possession of assault weapons. Did the pollsters tell these people that assault weapons were banned in Canada back in 1977, 43 years ago? Now follow this carefully. While 65% of this 1,500 people strongly agree with a ban on a class of firearms that were banned over 40 years ago, an even larger group, 73% of them, admit they've never owned a firearm. Do these Canadians know anything about our current system? Do they know what guns are banned now? How do they know what needs to be changed? How would they know that bans are going to help? The truth is, they don't know any of these things. The majority of these kinds of opinions are typically formed by two things. Number one, exceedingly rare but incredibly tragic events involving guns and violence, which no one disputes or defends. And worse, number two, false rhetoric coming from politicians and anti-gun groups. This is a problem. The people in this poll now serve as a mechanism for the government to tell Canadians that everyone agrees. Just support a ban on whatever firearms the government tells you that you don't need. So, to the contrary, how tightly are firearms regulated in Canada right now?
The process of getting your firearms license starts with the prerequisite in Canada, which is taking the firearm safety course, or courses. There's either a 1 or 2 day course. The single day course or the non-restricted firearm safety course, which pertains to long guns, sporting guns, hunting guns, shotguns and rifles that you would use for target shooting, that type of thing. That's an 8-hour course, not including exams, which is after the 8 hours of instruction. The additional course one could take is the restricted firearm safety course, which is an additional 4 hours if it's next day, or 6 hours if you're taking it to upgrade from an existing license. And the restricted firearm safety course, as the name implies, allows the student to focus on learning about restricted class firearms. Handguns in Canada are all restricted. At the end of each day's class, we have 2 exams. The first exam for each day is a written exam. Students have to get, in Ontario, 80%. Once you pass the written exam, then they bring you back at the end of the day for a one-on-one private practical exam. So the practical exam really ensures that you did show me during the examination period that you understood what was being taught with regards to safe handling of the firearms. Once you pass the exams, the Chief Firearms Office in Ontario, they'll return your paperwork within 3 to 5 weeks. And at that time, you'll have written proof stamped by the Chief Firearms Office that you've taken the courses, you've passed the courses. At that point, you're ready to apply for your license. You need to take a recent photo. You'd have to have that photo endorsed by a guarantor. The instructions are clearly labeled on the application form. Form 5592, which is the RCMP number. It's a legal document. You'll have to disclose any previous convictions, whether or not you've been treated for depression or substance abuse, alcohol addiction has to be committed. You also have to answer on your application whether anyone in your house that you live in has had issues with drug trafficking or any firearm prohibition orders. You also have to include the names and addresses of your two personal references. So these are individuals over 18 that you've known for 3 or more years, and they are people that will vouch for you, providing the RCMP does call them as a, again, personal reference. And they often do. If a new Canadian has been here less than 5 years, they require a letter of good conduct issued by the local or state police authority of the previous country they've come from. And also Americans that might be coming up to do some hunting, and maybe they want to have a firearm permanently located at their camp or relative, or maybe they're moving to Canada. Once you send in your application for your firearms license, obviously it's going to go into the RCMP headquarters where the Firearms Center is located in Miramichi, New Brunswick. There's a 28-day cooling off or waiting period where they will sit on it. It collects dust for a month. Then they begin to process it. At the provincial level, it goes to the Chief Firearms Office at your province, and they may additionally contact you or your references for any additional information. After the background checks are completed, providing they pass, the references have passed, then you get your license card in the post. Usually takes 2 to 3 months after you've sent it in, but unfortunately, I think lately now with the COVID days, things are extended to probably more like 4 to 5 months. Once you've got your firearms license card, then and only then you may go to the store to buy your firearm, after all this has been done.
So we're at the point where we can legally acquire and possess a firearm in Canada. Now, where do we go from here? We'll find out when we come back. Welcome back. If a private person wants to legally acquire a firearm in Canada, they need to be licensed. That's been the law since Bill C-51 was passed way back in 1977. The licensing system was updated again in 1992. Before the break, we talked about what it takes to get a firearms license in Canada. But our story hasn't gotten to the point of an individual actually buying their first firearm yet. Let's see what that looks like.
Every store has certain fundamental rules that they have to follow. We all add on our own checks and backups to the process. So for us, we have a cage as you come through our door. So that's sort of our first check, if you want to call it that. If we get a group of 15-year-olds come to our door, we just don't let them in. We're sorry, kids, come back with your parents if you want to look. Above and beyond that, every individual that wants to handle a non-restricted firearm, when they come in the store, their license has to be checked first. It has to be valid, and then they can handle the firearm. If they choose to purchase, what we do is when we invoice out the gun, because every gun goes out with an invoice for warranty purposes, is we write down the expiry date of your license on the invoice for non-restricted, so that it proves to us that the license was validated before the firearm went out the door. I know that politicians have stated in the past that there is no requirement to check that a license is valid for a non-restricted sale. That's patently false. I know for a fact that my chief firearms officer would be down here in a second if he knew that we were doing that sort of thing and that my license would be yanked. For the last 20 years or more that I've been in the industry, we've always checked the firearms license to make sure that it's valid and that it matches the user. It's a photo ID, so we can actually put the license up to the customer, make sure it's the right guy if we want. We're even able to ask for a driver's license to match the ID. It's a criminal offense to transfer a firearm to a non-licensed individual. So we'd lose our business license in a real hurry if we were doing that sort of thing. Basically, a customer comes in, shows us his license. We keep the license usually on the counter while we pull handguns out of the case for him to view. Once the customer decides on which restricted firearm he wants to purchase, we take his information down, including his name, address, a variety of other things like gun club membership, city of birth, all that sort of thing, so that we can initiate the transfer. Either we phone the transfer in at that stage or we do it online. The transfer generally takes a couple of days because the firearm's registered to the company, and that registration has to be transferred from the company to the owner before he can take it home. Now, once that transfer is done and the RCMP have completed their background checks and done their paperwork on their end, then the customer can come and pick it up on a short term. So the short term is usually faxed to us, and they can pick that firearm up, take it home and store it in their vault. It can't go anywhere else until their little registration certificate comes in the mail about, usually on average, 2 to 3 weeks later. Ammunition is handled the same way that non-restricted firearms are. So we go through the exact same process with ammunition, with the exception that we don't write an invoice for it because there's never a warranty issue with ammo. It's once it's sold, it can't be returned. So, but you're still required to produce a firearms license. It has to be valid, and we have to make sure you are who you say you are before you leave the store with it.
From the time that someone wants to legally purchase a firearm, let's say a handgun, to the point where they're actually at the range using it, they spend anywhere from $400 to $800 and jumped through government hoops and qualifications for 3 to 6 months. From this point on, they're now monitored on a daily basis for any bad behavior for as long as they hold that license. That's right. If you hold a possession and acquisition license in Canada, or PAL, you are included in a program called Continuous Eligibility Screening.
The RCMP monitors our conduct every 24 hours to ensure that there is no violations of either the criminal code or regulatory offenses that would impede upon our ability or character to own a firearm. That if there is, behavior that they deem questionable, they're entitled to come into the home and inspect our collection without a warrant, which is really unprecedented for the sort of rest of society within Canada. And then we also, of course, have the renewal process every 5 years where we have to go through a new renewal, and the RCMP again does their background checks to ensure that we are compliance with laws generally before we're allowed to continue firearm ownership.
Canadians that hold a firearms license can also be subject to searches of their home. They're called inspections according to Section 101 of the Firearms Act. Between possible searches of your home, months of pre-qualifications, to daily monitoring, it should be clear to any reasonable person that Canada does not just hand out licenses to anyone, and that some conditions of licensing are even near violations of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That's the law as it stands in Canada today, and has for decades. All that being said, we're not done yet. There's a lot more to come right after this. Welcome back. Once someone has purchased a firearm, there are strict regulations that they have to comply with to store, transport, and handle them. These rules are administrative in nature, yet non-compliance triggers the criminal code. Explained another way, if you were caught speeding, an activity in some cases dangerous to countless members of the public, you'd receive a fine and possibly points on your license. In short, it's a regulatory offense, not a criminal offense. If a firearm owner was in contravention of the firearm regulation, it's a criminal offense. For example, improperly storing your firearm, administrative or paperwork offenses are punishable by the following. Every person who stores, displays, transports, or handles a firearm in a manner contrary to the regulations is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment in the case of a first offense for a term not exceeding 2 years, and in the case of a second or subsequent offense for a term not exceeding 5 years, or guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction. That's the less severe penalties, a fine of $5,000 and or 6 months in prison. These are life-destroying penalties for paperwork or administrative offenses, criminal penalties. Now, to be fair, it's not to say that it's not important to store your firearm safely. That's not the point. It's to say that the claim that Canada has lax gun laws is absurd and frankly a lie. Up to this point, we have not discussed all the regulations that directly apply to licensed gun owners, but let's move on to examine whether or not there are sufficient firearm laws that apply to real criminal use of firearms.
The law in this area is so complicated and it's so convoluted and it's so difficult to parse out that many people who have a legal education still struggle with these, with these issues and with the intricate technicalities that can sometimes come up. If you were driving, home from the range and you have forgotten to unload the firearm, it's a mistake, and it's a criminal mistake because now you're transporting a loaded firearm. You should have taken those steps. The impact is going to be very high even if the court says, listen, you know, this is a fairly innocent mistake in the sense that while it's criminal, you didn't intend to do anything wrong. This is an accident. Nobody was hurt. But still, here's a criminal record. What I was finding is that there's a lot of people who are getting tripped up by these laws. And so that always is a place that I think the law should maybe adapt. Because if we're tripping up a lot of people who are trying their best to, you know, to do the right thing, then I see that as a problem. The law should exist to sort of try to push people who are engaging in criminal activity into, you know, into compliance and to protect the public. But there's a certain point where some laws can actually be a danger to the public if they're going to criminalize behavior that is otherwise innocent.
When politicians and anti-gun activists say that we need common sense gun laws or we're doing so much worse than our peer nations, it's incredibly misleading. For example, if someone broke into a home, stole a firearm, then committed a drive-by shooting with it, which does happen in Canada, they would be subject to around 12 firearm charges at the discretion of the Crown. These charges would apply 73 years in prison and 2 life sentences just for the firearm offenses alone, not including the murder or assault. Now, this isn't the way that it works in reality here in Canada. No one would be charged with all of the applicable offenses. But the point is that we aren't short on laws. It almost seems like more regulation isn't stopping people from hurting each other or selling drugs or trafficking firearms or committing other crimes. It almost seems like the hard work of dealing with root causes needs to be done if we're truly interested in reducing violence. But a gun ban is a lot easier. It's politically popular with some people. You know where to find all the licensed gun owners. They're not hiding from you. And it can be done in one election cycle. When we come back, here in 2020, we're being sold red flag laws by the Liberal government. Have police been powerless to take firearms from people misusing them this whole time? Well, we'll find out. So stay with us. One of the talking points Bill Blair, the current Liberal Minister of Public Safety, uses often is that Canada needs red flag laws. Well, it makes sense. All the sense in the world to the average Canadian. The police should be able to seize firearms in the interest of public safety, but the truth is, that's the law now, and it has been for decades.
The police can certainly seize firearms, especially if there's an offense committed, such as an assault or a threatening with a weapon. Then the police can go in and seize firearms. So the red flag law, which is United States, that's basically where people can approach the courts and ask a judge to seize firearms from an individual. In Canada, we are, first of all, we're a lot stricter with our legislation as far as getting a PAL or an RPAL, and the police have the authority to seize firearms when they have cause to do so. You know, for example, if somebody threatened a spouse or a partner, or used, had some violent tendencies and did something violent, then the police could go in and seize firearms. But again, they'd have to have cause. It wouldn't just be an anonymous call to say, take Rob Morrison's guns from him. They'd need to have some evidence, so they would investigate that.
So these laws are already in place. They're used where they should be, assumingly. But some minimal conditions exist to ensure that a threat is investigated before action is taken against someone. Well, it seems pretty reasonable, seems pretty well established. So why make Canadians think that we don't have these kinds of regulations today? Could this be politically motivated? And if so, is it at all acceptable to mislead people, to fool them into thinking that you're tackling violence when you're not? Most people would find that unacceptable. In this episode, we had a close look at the regulations around acquiring and possessing firearms in Canada, the rules around storage, transportation, and handling of firearms. We also had a detailed look at the endless laws that are on the books to respond to the criminal use of firearms. It's nowhere near reasonable to imply that Canada needs more regulation. The mountain of regulations that we built, the hundreds of years in jail time that individuals are exposed to by misusing firearms has not changed the homicide or suicide rate in Canada at all. We know that. At some point, we need to consider that maybe we've been headed in the wrong direction, maybe for a long time. Some people may need to swallow their pride and consider that they may have been wrong. It's hard to do. Most people know why violence exists with or without firearms. As we've said relentlessly in this series, poverty, unemployment, polarization, radicalism, lack of opportunity. Minimize or solve these problems and you've solved your gun problem, and you end up with a better society for everybody. Private firearm ownership is important. Some might say it's essential in distinguishing free societies from those that are less free. Canadians own firearms for good and sufficient reasons, and it's wrong to take them away from all the people who've done nothing to deserve it. Civilian firearm ownership in our society is worth protecting for a variety of reasons. Speaking of which, next time on Gun Ban Canada Exposed, we'll take an in-depth look at these reasons and find out more about Canada's real gun culture, a story you'll never hear from the mainstream. Until then, thanks for watching.